We have discussed the idea of a 4-day work week now, it seems to me, fair to say for years. Maybe this started back during the pandemic or immediately afterward when some people started bringing this up. Yet today there is a new approach, a 4-day work week. Could it be coming to Canada? Well, let's start by talking about what's happening in Japan right now. In Tokyo, they have launched a pilot program to offset Japan's demographic crisis of a low fertility rate, something we in Canada are also dealing with. John Trougakos is a professor of organizational behavior at the University of Toronto and is on the line. Mr. Trougakos, thanks for being here this afternoon. Before we get to the part about Canada, maybe, do we perhaps follow suit here? Can we run down what they're doing in Tokyo and why they're doing this?
Yeah, so a couple of things, even before we get to that, if you don't mind. The idea of a 4-day work week has been around for quite some time. In fact, it was something floated in the Nixon administration in the United States, and in the 1970s, a number of organizations trialed it with compressed work weeks, and then working 10 hours a day was a bit tricky for people, so it didn't really work out, whereas the modern 4-day work weeks are actually removing one day work a week and finding greater efficiency to do so, leveraging the technology we have. I think the plan in Tokyo, from my understanding of it, is that the idea is to reduce the number of days that employees are going to be working, which is a very interesting concept in and of itself because, of course, Japan has one of the highest work demand cultures of any country in the world. In order to help their society gain a bit more free time in the hopes of boosting their falling fertility rate.
So we have been talking here, and obviously this came up, I think, for the most part during the pandemic, this idea of work-life balance. So clearly what they're doing in Tokyo is part of that. But with reference to this fertility issue, Canada's lower birth rate, how does this come into play as far as the 4-day work week is concerned?
So while I'm not a fertility expert, from a business perspective and from an organizational perspective, one of the things that I do spend quite a bit of my time researching is employee stress and burnout, productivity and well-being. And so the idea is, of course, what we do know, and what I, in fact, probably have enough knowledge to know is that there, increased levels of stress does have a negative relationship with people's fertility, both for men and women. And so the idea is that if you create a better work-life balance for people, that this would reduce stress, would reduce burnout, make them healthier. And so number one, provide people a healthier way of living that could potentially increase the probability of having children. And then on top of that, providing greater work-life balance to where people could feel that they have more time to spend with family and to have quality experiences raising children when they do have them, and also with their partners. So from that perspective, it really is an interesting idea. And I think most organizations that are doing this for a employee well-being and productivity perspective. And when I work with organizations in implementing these models, this is one of the, this is really the primary reason. This is, the potential for a secondary reason in society that we are, talking about now that is different probably than what we were talking about before when it came to 4-day work weeks.
Yeah, so with reference to job satisfaction, obviously working longer hours is something that would not make you as satisfied as your job. And I understand what you just said now, but, about pressure, work-life balance. But then the argument always seems to be, okay, we'll give you one less day. Let's say it's a 4-day work week, but those hours have to be made up somewhere. So how does that fit into the equation?
So one of the things that we're seeing with organizations that are successfully implementing modern 4-day work weeks, and these are the things you see in the trials in the UK and Canada and the United States, is that it's actually same pay for less work. So it's actually one full less day of work. And what it is if we think about organizations and the technology we have, whether it's our communication technologies or AI or whatever it might be, we have not really fully leveraged that to the maximum capacity to facilitate more efficient and effective work that allow people to also work in a less stressed and have manner and have better well-being. And so from that perspective, what we see with a lot of the organizations in these big global trials that you're seeing is actually a full reduction of work time, not just a reduction of a work day. And so that's the difference between previous iterations of this historically and what we see in most organizations that are implementing this today.
So with that being said, are we seeing as much productivity from companies that have implemented these changes as they got before, even with reduced hours?
So not only are we seeing as much productivity, and the data is out there that demonstrates this, but we're actually seeing in a number of cases organizations showing better productivity and a substantial cost saving when it comes to things like sick leave, when it comes to things like retaining employees or mitigating turnover costs, mitigating costs of hiring new employees. They're also able to attract better talent. And you see a number of organizations, mid and small size, as well as organizations in different locations that are maybe have a harder time attracting top talent, using this as a tool to be able to bring top employees to their organizations.
You know, I think about the other issue here, which to me seems to be employers who will look at this and say, well, that might work for some businesses, but it won't work for mine. That's a natural reaction, I would guess, from some. Is that something that you're seeing or have seen?
So that's a common concern that we've heard, in many instances. And one of the things that I would say is that when this is implemented properly, we've seen it successfully implemented across a host of industries and organizations. And so it really comes down to doing the work, and like with any major change initiative, to make sure that you implement a model that works best for your organization. Now, it could be a 4-day work week. There's other options as well. There's shortened hour work days. There's 9-day fortnights. We're seeing a whole host of different things. And this is one of the silver linings of the pandemic, is that it's opened up the opportunity for changes like this across organizations, where they've had the chance to say, okay, we did things a certain way for a very long time. This pandemic happened. It had a lot of negative things, but this is an opportunity for us to be able to say, how can we do things differently or better, and utilize the technologies that we've gained greater knowledge on over the last few years to be able to allow our employees to work better and our organization to work more effectively. And so, again, we've seen it in education. We've seen it in healthcare. We've seen it in, of course, office jobs like you would commonly see in service jobs. I've heard of examples of this in manufacturing, and you're seeing many, in fact, manufacturing companies implement this as well. So there's a host of examples out there where we're seeing this be effective.
Just as a final question, as I hear you describe this, I think back about how things have changed. We ended up, of course, thanks to the pandemic, with people working from home. But now here we are 4 or 5 years into this, where companies are now saying, you know what, that might have been better for the employees' work-life balance, but they're calling workers back to the office now. That seems to be a growing trend. So does that work against what you're describing?
So I think part of this callback to the office has nothing to do with productivity or effectiveness. In fact, when we look at the data and you look at recent studies that are published there is no indication that being back in the office leads to better organizational outcomes than working, for example, in a hybrid model. So that's number one. I think we've got to keep in mind. This a lot of times is a question of what people are comfortable with, and what old school managers are comfortable with, and what they have the ability to be able to get employees to do. So from that perspective, and the motivation could be different, right? I mean, some organizations might want to downsize and are just calling employees back in for the sake of a headcount reduction. We're seeing that, I think, as an example in the United States being discussed as well. So there's a lot of different motivations for why organizations are doing this. That has nothing to do with the effectiveness or productivity of the organization in the big picture, and at least not in terms of what we see in terms of the data. The data does not necessarily support that working full-time back in an office. In fact, it does not support that working full-time back in the office leads to greater productivity by employees.
And that's where we'll leave it. I want to thank you so much for your time. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much.